Hello everyone, this is the first of 4 videos talking about my new EP for Perspectives. What I want to do is go into a little bit about how I made the tracks, the inspirations behind them, and have a look at some of the sound design and production. This EP was produced in slightly different circumstances to some of my other work. For starters, I was in France, away from my main studio over Christmas, but I did take a few choice bits of kit with me. Firstly, I had my little Surface Pro running Ableton on it, not my normal DAW. I had my little Arturia keystep MIDI controller, not my normal MIDI controller. I had my Zoom recorder over here somewhere out of shot doing my dialogue for today, and my luxury item, which is part of my normal setup, my Expressive E Touche. It's a bit of a big thing to travel with for what it is, but to be honest, I love it so much I couldn't be without it. I also brought with me a big library of old ideas and field recordings and things, so I wasn't going to be bored. So that was the setup. Without further ado, let's get started with track 1, which is titled Paths and Poets. This was the first track I wrote for the project. It started life on another holiday, this time in West Wales. I was out walking and I discovered this really beautiful path, which is actually the one that's on the cover of the EP. Apart from looking beautiful, I loved the collage of sounds that it had, the leaves rustling in the wind, the birds, the bees, the sounds of the hazelnuts falling in the autumn. So I recorded about 5 minutes of it and knew that I had to turn it into something quite special. On that particular trip, I had my Modal Craft synth with me, so as soon as I got back, I started making some sounds that I thought might fit well with the recording. The first one of those sounds that I came up with is this sort of chordal pad that you hear fairly early on in the recording. It's a really dusty, nostalgic sound that I came up with, and it really sort of set the tone for the rest of this piece, and although I didn't really realise it at the time, it set the tone for the rest of this whole project. The second sound I came up with is the rhythmic pulsing sound effect that comes in shortly afterwards in the piece. And obviously this was from playing around with LFOs and things, but the main inspiration actually for this sound was this feature on the Craft synths where you can detune the oscillators initially by a normal small amount, but then as you crank the knob further, it snaps to fixed intervals, so you get the fourth, a fifth, an octave and a third, etc. And I did a pass of me just playing with the detune knob, which sounded a bit like this. Unfortunately, although it's a cool effect, it's a really difficult effect to control. I don't know if you're familiar with the Craft synth. I don't unfortunately have mine anymore to show you, but the knobs on it are absolutely tiny. And although it's a cool effect, I wasn't happy with the way that it sounded just from the knob. So what I did for the final version that you hear is I recreated the sound in Arturia Pigments, which is my absolute favourite synth at the moment, so I could play in the notes that I wanted on the keyboard. I'll show you that now. So the basis of it is a really simple analog sound, as you can see, with one oscillator as a fixed drone on the G, so I can then play the other oscillator essentially on the keyboard. Just a quick note on this one, I'm using the functions to generate the pulsing effect rather than the LFO, because I wanted a really specific trapezoid shape that the normal LFOs wouldn't do. But as I was only using one Pigments engine, and there are 2, I thought I'd have a bit of fun with it and change the sound, make it a bit more interesting. I added this bell sample in just to emphasise every change of notes. So the drone stays the same, but every time you change the higher notes, it just rings and emphasizes. So it sounds like this. So as you can see, this part was really just improvised. I played it in pretty much one take. Arranging the track was fairly simple, although I did add a few extra sounds, as you can see down here. The first one is this piano sound that is mostly here during the break, just as a contrast to all the electronic sounds. So this is just a stock Ableton piano sound. And then, because it just needed some little extra bit in the break, I added in some string synth sounds, which you can hear. This piece has a really sort of vintage feel to it, and nothing kind of does that vintage feel quite like a string synth. This particular one is from Sonic Couture's The Attic library, which I thoroughly recommend if you're into kind of weird, quirky synths. There's none of your kind of classic Selenas and Jupiters and things here. It's full of lots of really odd things, as you can see here. This particular string synth is a Godwin string concert, which I had never heard of until I got this library. But it just adds a bit of something a bit different to this track. This is also a good opportunity to show you how I like to use the touche. You can actually set it up in Ableton as a control surface rather than doing the MIDI mapping through its Liaise software. So you can map it to pretty much any parameter that you can automate. So here I've got it connected to the EQ on the strings part, and it's just a really nice way to do these sort of slightly creative effects, and I find it a lot more fun than twiddling knobs. As you can see, this is a really sparse track, so mixing it was fairly easy, but mastering it was a huge pain. If you've worked with field recordings before, you'll know that they can be incredibly dynamic, and in this case I had sort of sounds of falling hazelnuts and breaking twigs and things that were peaking 12, 18 dB above the ambient level, which was absolutely playing havoc with all my gentle mastering compressors. So you can see where I've had to sort of do a bit of editing to get rid of some of the spikier sounds, just to keep everything even. But in the end, it all turned out really nicely. I hope you'll agree. So that's Paths and Poets. I hope you've enjoyed this look behind the scenes, and if you've not heard it before, there'll be links in the description to this track and the rest of the EP. See you next time for track 2, Hollow Cells.